or people who are anxious about leaving the house, or people that are just thinking differently in a way that it's hard for them to organize their life sometimes, and making it to a service like this, it would just be too difficult on that particular day. Or people who experience poverty, isolation, or other things that might make transportation to a physical service difficult, or people with mental health issues who it might be hard to even sit at the services, maybe because of the symptoms they're experiencing related to their mental health issues, or the medications that they're taking for mental health issues can make it very hard. There's something called akathisia that if you think about it, like drinking 10 or 15 cups of coffee in the morning and how that gives you that buzz, for many people who take psychotropic medications, they experience this, and it makes it very hard to sit still and pay attention. So being part of a service like this, and I know it's not always the preferable way, and we don't like the reason why we have to do this right now, but this is universal design. This is exactly what Rabbi Shawn was talking about. What we're doing today is inclusion for everyone. I did want to make one other comment, Rabbi Shawn, and then hear more about what you'd like me to talk about. But I do also want to thank Gabby. It really is an honor to be able to participate with Gabby's congregation, because I'm really in awe of the work that she does with Jewish Learning Venture around promoting inclusion. She really is a blessing to our community. I also need to thank Shelley Christensen, who connected me to Gabby originally. Shelley's written an excellent book that people might be interested in. I have no financial conflicts, by the way, with this. She has a book called From Longing to Belonging, a practical guide to including people with disabilities and mental health conditions in your faith community. And I know Gabby, I know Gabby because of Shelley, and I know Shelley because of my father. My father was passed away in 2018, but before he passed away about 10 years ago, he was very proud of my work and encouraged me to speak more about inclusion issues of people with mental health issues in faith communities. He invited me to his synagogue in Minneapolis called Bet Shalom, and Shelley is a member of that congregation. So it's really because of my father that I'm here today. So I could say lots of things, Rabbi Shawn, but are there particular things you'd like me to focus on?
Sure. Dr. Salzer and I talk more about the talk show format rather than just the straight PowerPoint here. So we're in collusion with this approach. Well, first of all, you added some background, which I think is really important. Like each of us has our own story. There's a Yiddish poet who wrote, each of us has our own name we're given at birth, and then each of us has a name that we live into, that we're known by as a result. And so you gave us a bit of both about how you also, were given the opportunity and maybe the encouragement to start speaking about these issues. And certainly, I mean, thanks to Gabby and others in our community, we've tried. I don't want to sound triumphalist, because we also know where we have shortcomings in both our Hebrew school and our larger congregation in this area. In our building, for those of you that remember that, on Shores Lane, this actual synagogue building, part of our taking over this old mill in 2002 and redoing all of that included a number of physical accessibility issues. I even like the fact that when we have an aliyah coming up to Torah, there's no stairs to navigate. It's all on the same, carpeted floor. And so, you don't have to be reminded that you can't come up for a coming up, in that moment in time. So there's a lot of things that we've looked at there, and often focused on physical ability issues and challenges specifically at this time of year. But I think the thing that I really was intrigued by and appreciative of your work, especially in these times, which is something that you and I talked about earlier too, that there's a valence of existential challenge and mental taxation that all of us are going through. And now, almost at the anniversary of that first year, just to say that itself triggers certain things, in the brain about what we've carried to get to this point. So that could be a place of some withdrawal. But one of my hopes is our conversation today also allows us to lean further into that and not pull back and have greater empathy for those who may be what we're experiencing now, just like suddenly the explosion of greater awareness of white supremacy and racial injustice for many of those of us who are white. It was suddenly like, oh, and our brothers and sisters of color have been experiencing this all their lives, if not centuries. So there's a gateway for empathy here as well. So I wonder if you could start by saying what you're seeing in this moment in time and some of the connections to the ongoing work of inclusion that you've always been working on.
Yeah, so thank you for that. That definitely has triggered some thoughts that might be of interest to folks. So I know, I guess Rabbi Shawn has sent out some information about me, and I hope it wasn't my super long bio, but my short bio is I am a psychologist and I'm a professor at Temple University, and I've worked with people, done research primarily with people with we say very serious mental illnesses. So people diagnosed with schizophrenia, spectrum disorders, bipolar disorder, major depression. I've worked on inpatient units. I've run inpatient units, focused on psychopharmacological interventions, those kinds of things. In the course of my work, I became interested in this notion of inclusion and participation. And inclusion is the opportunity to live in the community like everyone else. That's based in the Americans with Disabilities Act that I appreciated having the opportunity to read a story behind the founding of the ADA. And that inclusion leads to increased participation. People being able to work, more people who experience disabilities being able to work, physical disabilities, sensory disabilities, intellectual developmental disabilities, psychiatric disabilities. And because we know work is important, educational attainment is important, going to college, university is important for people, leisure recreation is important, volunteering is important, social relationships is important, intimate relationships, parenting relationships, family relationships, and faith is important to people as well. And not only is it important, but we also have research that all of these things are medical necessities. These are employment, believe it or not, is associated with better physical, cognitive, and mental health and wellness. Same with education, leisure, recreation, social relationships, and faith as well. All important. And people with serious mental illnesses, like other people who experience disability, are not participating in these areas to the same degree as everyone else. And they're oftentimes, this is not because of the illness or the impairment, it's because of these environmental barriers, these steps, as we talked about, the 83 steps to get up the Supreme Court steps. Those are the types of things that oftentimes get in the way of people with serious mental illnesses. And I do agree with you, Rabbi Shawn, that now is a time, the last year, has been a time for many of us who haven't experienced the type of exclusion that people with disabilities and people who experience serious mental illnesses have experienced in their lives that limit their opportunities to participate. Now, many of us are feeling this, hopefully not around employment necessarily, but at least in terms of our social interactions, even though many people have lost their jobs, certainly over the last year as well. And I mean, I hate to say it, but I hope this brings out that greater empathy for all of us and awareness of how this affects our health, our physical health, the way we think, our cognitive health, and our mental health and wellness. And I hope that thankfully when this pandemic goes away and we return to some new sense of normalcy, that we don't forget this and we allow it to energize us and to continue to pay attention on how exclusion and lack of opportunities to participate impacts the experience of people who have disabilities, including, and maybe more especially, people with serious mental illnesses who experience a great deal of exclusion for poverty reasons, transportation, and prejudice and discrimination as well.
In keeping with that, I wonder if you could bring us into some of the things that you're seeing and have seen over time as it relates to where the blind spots may be. So again, not wanting to overly pat ourselves on the back, but I think one of my attractions even to serving at Mishkan Shalom was because there was a certain base awareness of some of these issues. But just like in racial justice issues, we often can trip up over microaggressions, the blind spots, a sense of, oh, we've handled this one, or that couldn't happen here in our community. And so I'm assuming a certain basic understanding here amongst those of us this morning, particularly who have self-selected to be part of the service this morning. But I wonder if you could bring us into some of the places where you notice a certain unconsciousness, even with aware communities, that people with mental illness and challenges of different abilities kind of run into, and that we can be maybe more aware of, bring it out of the shadow into the light.
Yep. So some of the blind spots, I mentioned one of them to begin with, related to the video conferencing, just the awareness that for some people coming to a physical place is just difficult, and anything that can be done to, when we hopefully can return to that physical place, to the sanctuary, that we can maintain some type of internet video presence or opportunities for people to be engaged. And that is very significant. There are lots of people who experience depression, very common condition, including people who don't leave their bed for weeks and months on end, where the opportunity to participate as part of as a member of a congregation by video is critically important. But some of the other things have to do with the social connections. Many people with serious mental illnesses have been treated poorly by people in the past, and fear coming to a faith community, including a synagogue, because they worry that people won't treat them well because they haven't been treated well in the past. So some congregations have developed what are called friendly helpers, people who welcome any new person to the congregation and are kind of the connection. So it doesn't have to be the rabbi or leadership. It could be anybody who volunteers to be one of these friendly helpers, who just checks in with somebody, says, hey, how you doing? Sends an email during the week. But that can be incredibly important for somebody who has felt that isolation and discrimination and prejudice in the past. There is a type of intervention called circles of support for an individual who, because of certain behaviors or ways of thinking or ways of interacting with other people, or behaving with other people, or in certain settings where people come together from the congregation and maybe elsewhere, who work to support that individual in ways that they want in order to be supported. It's called, again, circles of support. And this is something that can also be used to facilitate full inclusion and participation. The last that unfortunately I hear all too often is individuals who have been members of congregations or maybe attended service once or twice, and things were happening in their lives related to their mental health issues, where they may have been particularly angry or been responding to things that we don't see or hear that they're responding to. And maybe they're talking out loud or doing things that people find to be very disruptive. And I've heard, unfortunately, too many stories of people who have been asked to leave congregations and never come back again because it generated fear, people felt like the sanctity of the religious service was so violated, and they don't want it to be violated again, that this person has been asked to never come back. And I have concerns about that from an inclusion standpoint. And there are strategies, there are alternatives for welcoming individuals back by negotiating a contract with the person where you can talk about the issues, the things that have happened, and talk about, can we think of strategies to reduce that happening again, and things that we can do if it does happen again, so we can all respond. And if things happen, next time, what are we going to do about it and the time after that? So the person doesn't feel completely rejected from that one incident, and instead knows that the community is welcoming of them and would like them to come back. The last one is around prejudice and discrimination, and all of this, I've mentioned the term in the past. And this can be a blind spot, even for those of us who think of ourselves as being very progressive and inclusive. And I'll include myself in that as well. You mentioned, Rabbi Shawn, the microaggressions, the things that we aren't even aware of that we do or say. And really, it's incredibly important to continue to reflect and have dialogue about these issues, about mental health issues. And the big one boils down to fears of violence. Unfortunately, we have all heard of incidents where somebody who's been described as having a very significant mental health issue has done great harm to faith communities, and faith communities are responding sometimes with rejection of individuals, and rejection out of fears of that same type of incident occurring in their congregation. And really, that requires conversation, and frequent conversation, not just once a year somebody like me comes and talks about mental health issues, but really open conversations among members of congregations about mental health issues, about where people feel safe to certainly express their fears about violence, but also having conversations about the fact that violence is not something that is endemic to serious mental illnesses, to schizophrenia, and really learning the research and learning the facts about these types of issues, and really having these conversations in the community, and continuing to address that over and over again. I'll end on this. Again, we know prejudice and discrimination is an issue. We oftentimes call this stigma. We've done all sorts of things to combat stigma. Usually, again, it's May is Mental Health Month, or second week of October is Mental Health Awareness Week. Or we have famous people, Ariana Grande, I think, has come out and talked about her depression. I don't really know her. I know she's well known, and young people like her music, younger people than me at least. But this is not enough. Lo must speak. When I go to Israel, I say lo must speak all the time about what's happening. That means not enough. We know that these kinds of things that we're doing are not enough for reducing prejudice and discrimination, the stigma. It is still here and maybe stronger than ever. And so this really requires us to talk about these issues all the time. From the Bima, in our conversations, in Torah study, and all the time, because this is so ingrained in us, in our ways of thinking, that it's doing damage to our ability to promote inclusion and participation.
Thank you so much, Mark, for that, and laying it out with some of the specificity too. I want to give us a chance in a short breakout group just to reflect on what's been evoked so far in what you've shared, and also just to acknowledge, I was on a clergy call this week about people, how we're coping with this, even this next stage, which has been described as moving from fatigue to exhaustion. that a lot of people, we're almost at that first anniversary. And even mentioning it, the encouragement was make a note of these times and space, because by naming it, you can hopefully lift some of the veil where some of us may have adapted well. I know the way we have more being offered in our community every day than we ever have before. And, I had someone that came to me as a client recently, another clergy person who just got back into the pulpit and had their first Zoom service. And it all went great. And as soon as, instead of going to the Kiddush with people, it was goodbye and the Zoom call hand on, they fell into a depression that they had not experienced for a long time as an adult, and didn't know how to cope with what got triggered by the sudden cutoff of connection and the absence of the usual person-to-person contacts. Now, that's more an intense example, but nonetheless, being able to name those, and we do as a staff with our president, Steve Jones here. He and I will compare notes at the end of the week too. And there may be even things like rethinking when we hold meetings, how many Zoom experiences we can have, and knowing that there may be for some of us, some more chronic mental health challenges that we've carried in life. Others are surfacing now, and we're not necessarily sure how to deal with them because the curtain has been drawn back due to our times. And for those of us in leadership positions, how do we also navigate and name things while still rising to the occasion, or delegating and deferring and functioning within reduced capacity, even as the expectation may be greater. So those are just some of the meta things that I notice that are arising for me and in many communities of faith, and as we continue to meet these circumstances. And then there's the other piece, and then we're going to jump into breakout groups and come back for our Torah reading of when you're trying to reach for a level of inclusion, as we've discovered even in Hebrew school, where you can have two kids on the autistic spectrum or with maybe a more demonstrable physical need, and they're not even different labels to those challenges, but they manifest in different ways. So, giving latitude to one child to swivel around in their chair or roll around on the carpet, and then the other child with the same condition for whom any distraction immediately prevents them from learning anything. And, and then suddenly you're within the inclusion, you're dealing with differentiation, and you pivot in one way that triggers the issue for somebody else who's also maybe has a different, challenge, or even the same one. So that's something I know that we, as we mainstream and try to create inclusive place, that then you deal with a level of nuance sometimes. Even as a congregation that now has growing elders and not only younger people, there's what level the light switch should be on be for services that there's some agreement with, whether so-and-so can handle clapping in a service or drumming or not, and whether we do that or not, depending on who's in the room. These are all issues, sometimes with physical and mental challenges intersecting there that we're dealing with. So I just want to kind of, there's no easy answer for those things, but I just want to kind of bring in that next level of when you step into these issues, we're either inclusive or we're not. There's actually, now that we really are reaching for this, you need to be prepared for a whole range of differentiation. Maybe you have something to say to that, Mark, before we do breakout rooms, since this is your field day by day.
No, I will only say you're absolutely right. There's not one way to be inclusive or promote inclusion. That's all. So I'm involved, one area, I'm a professor at Temple University and work very closely with the Disability Resource Services Office. And one of the philosophies is what works for one person works for one person. There isn't one way to do it. And these are challenging dilemmas. I guess the one way, though, that a community is not being inclusive is if they don't delve into these dilemmas, if they don't talk about it at all. So if you're not talking about these things, then and not dealing with the dilemmas, then you're not probably fully promoting inclusion.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, on that note, We'll give each other, it's going to be a short one, a lightning round, so make sure you each get at least a minute or so to just say what's arising for you as you have heard Dr. Mark's words, and we'll come back in just a few minutes. You may have to accept, like Mission Impossible, you may have to accept the invitation.
To move on, but yeah, these conversations about moving forward, I know they're complicated. These are those dilemmas that we talked about before in promoting inclusion, and different congregations try to address it in different ways. So it's great to be here with everybody.
Thank you again. We'll give you a Mishkan sprinkle. We don't usually applaud, but we certainly sprinkle each other. And invite you, if you're so willing, just to reach out through the camera there and grab hold of the Torah cover and just give a little pull. Oh, that was great. Awesome. Very powerful. Okay, so the Torah has now been uncovered, and I'm going to roll it out here. And Mindy, if you could put up the slide with our 3 aliyot, and then I'll share the kavanot. And Mark, of course, you're welcome to. Our tradition here is we usually do 3 aliyot and a few lines of each of them. And you can come up or kind of reach out and connect with the Torah through the camera for 0, 1, 2, or 3 of them. So there's you don't use up your credit if you choose one of them. And a little further, Mindy, if we can. That's the blessing. Just go one more. There we are. Okay, so Rivka is going to chant for us beginning on chapter 23 of Shemot of Exodus. If you've got a Chumash, that's there, by all means. And the 3 that we've chosen for this time, again, and I think they have application to what we've talked about today as well, is the first aliyah addresses false rumors, to not join with the guilty. I mean, just given some of the news from Washington and even today, the revelation that stuff is being, wait, bring it back, slowed down there. This is part of how Mindy tries to test me to see if I'm paying attention to the screen, but I was on to you. What's going on in Washington and the calling of witnesses now and the slowing of the process, I feel we're sending some energy there with that one to not join with the guilty, to not be malicious witness and side neither with the mighty nor undue deference to the poor person in a dispute. And if you find something of people that are your, quote, enemies, or you have a disagreement with, or they're from, quote, another group, that you return that lost property, that you don't use your feeling towards somebody to dictate how you're going to operate. So if that kavanah may call to you, and you may want to come up to connect with that one. The second aliyah, helping someone you have differences with when they're in need, and not to subvert the rights of those in need. Very apropos, I think, of what we're talking about today, to not bring death upon the innocent, because that karma will cling to you, and to not take bribes accordingly. And the last is something that, for the first time, I know, Steve, we've been talking about this in the planning group, is the reference to the Shemitah year, which is actually coming up next year. It has been 6 years since that, and the actual cycle in the land of Israel and for the Jewish calendar in general. So not to oppress the visitor. This is such a key piece that is just beginning to be enshrined in us in the Torah cycle, because it's so soon after we ourselves left oppression and being enslaved and being considered the other and the stranger. And the piece is, it's not just a justice issue, it's because you know the feelings of being treated other firsthand. And link that to the land. Don't treat the land as other. I think there's a direct connection there. Every 6 years, farm it, let it go, and then every 7th year, let it lie fallow, and don't gather up. Stuff is going to still grow, but those particularly in need or at disadvantage have the opportunity to glean. And similarly, 6 days of work and a 7th for Shabbat, not just for you or, quote, owning class, right? But all that are under your protection or supervision, animals, people who are strangers in the land, workers, all in your care. So those are our 3 aliyot this morning. And I'm going to relocate the laptop for a moment here so that we can actually see the scroll itself. And we'll leave the covenant up there so you can see what calls to you. And we're going to begin. Actually, maybe you'll have to go back in just a moment, Mindy. But so this first aliyah, Ya Amdu, and all of those who want to reach out through the lens with your hand or with your tzitzi to connect to this, who want to strengthen themselves against siding with those in power in order to preserve power and to not spread false rumors and get your facts straight and don't post something on Facebook right away because it incenses you, or leave an email in draft overnight when it's a heated one before you send it, whatever the case may be. Ya Amdu Aliyah Harishonah. And I'll connect to the Torah and then to you, anyone who's reaching out for this aliyah. You can unmute yourself if you're claiming this aliyah, and we can say the Reconstructionist blessing together. So, 1, 2, 3. Baruch Hu et Yah HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Yaborach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Chai Olamim Asher Kirvanu Le'avodato V'natan Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Atah Yah Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Lo tisa shema shav al teshet yadcha im rasha lihiyot et chamas lo tihye acharei rabim leraot velo ta'aneh al rov lintot acharei rabim lehatot Vidal lo tehedar berivo kitifga shur oivecha o chamaroto hashiv tashivenu lo.
And you can reach out to seal the deal. All whom this is an aliyah. Back at you. And we say the closing blessing. Baruch atah Yah Eloheinu haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Yah Noten HaTorah. Amen. Misheberach imotenu v'avotenu. May the one who is source of guidance and direction for our ancestors bless all of us who have come up for this aliyah today. Strengthen our resolve to not trade in rumors or influence. And strengthen our resolve to not prejudice against those in need, or less resources, or less power or connection. Let us take a stand for truth and justice in our own lives and hold accountable all those who represent us in the courts of public opinion and in governance, with all our siblings all across the world, and let us say, Amen. All right, so second aliyah, great, Mindy. Thanks for anticipating that. And I also want to be honest with you, and as we're talking about challenges here, the Torah seems to have rolled itself overnight. I actually had it rolled to the exact position, and I opened up this morning, and as is this Torah's wont, it has rolled itself to some other location. I can't explain this. So I don't want to pretend to be following something, but I haven't been able to find it quickly. So I'm just going to leave the Torah open with the yad there, and Rivka will continue to chant. But just wanted everybody to know, sometimes, you run into these places of challenge, and we can keep in with the spirit of it without getting caught in or fudging about it, right? So many of us, especially with physical ability challenges, are doing a lot of compensation a lot of the time, and it would be so much more freeing to just know what the challenges are and how we can mutually support each other, okay? So if you have a personal Torah at home and you can unroll it and find the spot quicker than the rabbi, please go for it. Otherwise, we'll deal with what we got today. So, Ya'amdu for the second Aliyah, continuing on Shemot, Exodus chapter 23, 5-8. For those of us that want this blessing, and I've heard a lot, from a lot of us, since it's not surprising at Mishkan, where the majority of our community stands on a variety of social and political issues, that being able to not necessarily agree or support differences or viewpoints of others, but not to subvert those people, and to not disparage people or otherize them is a real testing ground for us in this particular new day that we're in. So if you need that extra bracha to still extend yourself to those who you might consider an enemy, old term, but where you see them potentially as other or particularly triggering or challenging for you, this is a good bracha to take on for today. And that may include those with physical or mental or other challenges who, as Dr. Mark described, that fear gets in the way and creates a veil even before there's a connection with someone. Ya'amdu la'aliyah hashniya. Again, just reach out through the lens. Connect. If you're claiming this aliyah for yourself, feel free to unmute and we can say the bracha together. And thank you for all those that are echoing the bracha back as well. Baruch et Yahamivorah. Baruch Yamvorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Eloheinu ruach haolam asher kirvanu le'avodato v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah noten haTorah.
Amen. Kitire chamor sonacha rovehitz tachat masao v'chadaltam ezov lo azov ta'azov imo lo tatem mishpat ebyoncha b'rivo midvar sheker tirchaf Vinaki v'tzadik al ta'arog ki lo atzdik rasha v'shochad lo tikach ki hashochad yi'aver pekachim v'yisalev divrei tzadikim.
Amen. And we seal this aliyah with the bracha for all of us who have claimed it today. Baruch atah Eloheinu chai haolam asher natna lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Barucha ba'at Yah notenet haTorah. Amen. Mishaberach avotenu v'imotenu. May the one, the breath of life throughout all ages, help all of us who have risen for this aliyah today, and those of us who have borne witness, to be able to strengthen our principles and our hearts, to not let down our pursuit of justice and access and inclusivity. And at the same time, as we deal with those who may have different views or want to put roadblocks in the way, let us all also pay attention to the needs and the challenges they may have, which may be a greater gateway to understanding than the exchange of opinions. Let us hold our principles and also hold our hearts open with all the world, and let us say, Amen. Amen. Yasher koach to everybody who came up for that one and reached across the lens. By the way, I think this is, just gonna stretch this up for a minute, such an example of the principles that we're talking about today, where in the stress of trying to find things, that my brain tightened and I couldn't see the words. And as soon as I shared what the situation was and how we're going to deal with it, I looked down and there's Rivka's first word sitting right in front of me. But because of the anxiety, I couldn't see it, right? And so the naming of that, the claiming of trust in community, not just waiting for it, but saying, here's the truth of the situation, we can be together in this. Suddenly I relaxed and there were the words. So thank you, Rivka, for helping guide me back there, and the spirit of this community and your support. Which brings us to the third aliyah. I probably lost the place again, but that's okay. So it brings us to the third aliyah, where we're invited to start to prepare ourselves for this idea that everything is not supposed to be running 24/7, neither in each week nor each seventh year. And that part of that, interestingly enough, comes from the beginning of, before you go there, don't oppress the visitor, the person who's sojourning with you, because you know what it's like to be otherized. So make sure they get included in this process as well. That, oh, I'm sorry, we're not growing stuff this year. I'm glad for visiting. You'll just have to go hungry. That's not part of what it is. And of course, nor was everything just laid fallow. There was a rotational system to make sure that hunger and poverty did not deepen during this particular time. So just making sure that in our giving things a rest around us and the earth and all those in our care, that we don't set up exclusion at the same time while we get a rest and then somebody else doesn't, for example. So all of those who want to claim this aliyah for themselves, and this could be the first one for you or the third one, just again, reach out with your tzitzit or with your hand. It'll connect you now to that place in Torah, and we can say the bracha together. Baruch hu
Adonai Adonai Leolam Fa'el.
Amen. Baruch Yahweh Leolam Amen. Baruch atah Eloheinu melech haolam asher kirvanu levodato v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Yahweh notenet haTorah.
Amen. V'ger lo tilchatz v'atem yadatem et nefesh hager ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim v'shesh shanim tizra et artzacha v'yasafta et tevuata v'hashvi'it Tishmetenu v'nitashta v'yachlu ebyonei amcha v'yitra tochal chayat hasadeh kain ta'aseh lekarmecha l'zeitecha sheshet yamim ta'aseh ma'asecha uvayom hashvi'i tishbot leman yanuach shorcha v'chamorcha v'yinafesh ben amatecha v'hager.
And on that seventh day, you will really do Shabbat for your re-ensouling, for all those in your circle, and those who are the stranger in your care. And we seal this aliyah together. Baruch atah
Adonai
Eloheinu
Eloheinu melech
haolam asher
asher natan
natanu
lanu
Torah
Torah
emet
emet
v'chaye
v'chaye
olam
olam
nata
nata
b'tocheinu
b'tochenu. Baruch
Baruch
atah Adonai
atah
No
Noten
Noten
HaTorah.
HaTorah.
So Yasher Koach, everyone who came up for an Aliyah today, and all those who supported those coming up. And before we recover the Torah, just while it is open and our hearts are hopefully open too, we hold in them those in need of healing. In particular today, let's begin with thinking of those of us, maybe here or maybe others in your care and your thoughts, who are struggling with mental illness, maybe a diagnosed particular challenge. It may be COVID-induced or stress-induced, and maybe because of finances and employment, whatever it is, to spread our canopy wide, both compassion for ourselves and for each other. And we include as well those who are struggling with physical illnesses, with emotional challenges, and with spiritual quests as well. So we bring in your words, Moshe, when you beheld your sister Miriam in her struggle, and you chanted, Ana Elna Rafana, please be the resilience of healing of the universe and the resilience of the human body and soul. You can feel free to put the names in chat of people you're holding, or just hold them in your own hearts. Anna Elna Rifana, Anna Elna Rifana, heal our bodies, open our hearts, awaken our minds. Shekhinah, heal our bodies, open our hearts, awaken our minds. Elna, Anna, Elna, Rifana, Anna, Elna, Rifana. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May it be so. And Rivka, thank you for your beautiful laning. Brother Lior, bring us back into the sanctuary with strength by strength.
Strength to strength, sodo to sodo, we are the lineage, sodo. Strength to strength, sodo to sodo, we are the lineage, sodo. Strength to strength, sodo to sodo, we are
We are the
lineage,
holders. Amen. Amen. Thank you, Lior. Thank you. So we know for all we've talked, and we even know that Rabbi Shawn's going to say that we know this moment in time. I've said it so many times, this Aleinu moment. It's really up to us to bring these into our daily occurrences. But even notice today that what is happening now is already a possibility. And just like last night, when there was an incorrect link. So we actually, thank goodness, and poor Eugene received the call from me to ask me to open his room to redirect people to the actual other room that was the right link. And Lior was lost in the space-time continuum for a while, and we were not going to go any further until we got Lior into the actual room. And I remember at the closing last night, Madeline, where you said that first 10 minutes where we held both of these rooms and tried to bring them into one, and we were not going to leave anyone behind. It felt like the Exodus in and of itself, that brought us closer together. That was the beginning of the service. That was not the interruption of it. That itself was the thing that produced a sense of solidarity, and that people just waited in a very open place and held the space till everything landed. And when we said Shalom Aleichem, we began that, we really were welcoming each other in. So never try to pay attention to what this moment is. When we talk about godly presence or getting more present, it is this moment that is inviting us into that possibility. Right? So as our thanks begin to roll in for you, Dr. Mark, beginning from David and I'm sure others, I want to invite Lior, who's going to offer his chant about the great mystery as our Aleinu today. And Lior, is this, I want to give proper credit, is this your chant? Did you write this with someone else?
Actually, I think actually it was me and David, actually.
Okay, right. The Liebling Piver is like, Sondheim or Lennon and McCartney or whatever. So, all right. Join in as you feel moved too, David, but lead us into the mystery, Lior.
We are the mystery. We are the mystery. We are the mystery. From here the mystery comes. We are the mystery. We are the mystery. We are the mystery. From here the mystery comes. The mystery comes to that world. The mystery comes to that world. We are the mystery. We are the mystery. We are the mystery. From here the mystery comes. We are the mystery. We are the mystery. We are the mystery. From here the mystery comes. The mystery comes to that world. The mystery comes to that world.
Amen. Thank you, David and Lior. And part of that mystery, of course, is how those who have come before us live on in our memories, and the mystery of that balance between life and beyond life. And so as Mindy shares the Kaddish with us, we elevate the memory of those of our loved ones we may be saying Kaddish for this past year, who have passed this past year, or those for whom it's a yortzeit at this moment in time, or for those of us that are saying Kaddish for the many, many souls lost due to COVID and other related pieces, and especially today due to mental illness and challenges in life, that people have lost their lives and the challenge of that, or that have been met with less than welcoming arms and left to their isolation that way. May we be more committed to supporting those of us in need that way. So please rise or just elevate yourself in whatever way you are able and unmute. Those of us saying Kaddish, feel free again to put, as Steve and Lisa are doing, the names in the chat for those names you want to lift up at this moment in time. Yitkadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah Be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei B'chayechon uvyomechon u'b'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael Ba'gala uvizman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevorach Leolam U'almei Almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpo'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal Shmei Dekudasha.
Richu.
La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran ba'alma v'imru.
Amen.
Yehei Shlama Rabba min Shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru.
Amen.
Oseh shalom bimromav, hita'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol Yishmael, ve'al kol Yoshvei Tevel, ve'al kol ha'olamim, ve'imru.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. So, I think actually there's a next. Well, we'll hold off the next slide for just in a moment. We're getting better adept at having creative announcement slides with graphics, scratch and sniff pop-ups, so we want to make sure to give them their due. But before we go there, our president, Steve, just wanted to make sure that we got the closing bracha from you and your words of welcome.
Shabbat shalom, everybody. As always, I just feel like there's so little left to say. I think my brother David Piver really said it for me. That we engage in this struggle to include everyone because it's good for us. Not because it's good for somebody else out there, and we benefit so much from taking the perspective that we are that person that we're caring for, whether they're living with a disability or a mental illness. So I'm just really grateful for the particular way, as Rabbi Shawn says, every one of these meetings it's unique in the history of the universe. This meeting has never happened before, and it'll never happen again. And the way that was manifested for me today was just really a wonderful expression of human solidarity that we don't practice because it's good for somebody else, but it's good for us. So I want to thank Professor Salzer for making that happen for us, and also lift up the acknowledgement that he gave to Gabby, who's the person who speaks this language the best for us in a way that we can hear it. So Shabbat shalom.